64 years old, and I still check the locks twice before bed. My son Callum used to tease me about it when he was a teenager. "Dad, you act like someone's always about to knock the door down." I'd tell him, "Son, the ones who knock are the honest ones. It's the ones with a key you have to watch." He stopped laughing at that one eventually. Took him longer than it should have to understand what I meant. But he got there. My name is Ray Whitfield. I spent 31 years as a shift foreman at a timber processing plant outside Ballarat, Victoria. The kind of work that teaches you to read things, the sound a machine makes before it fails, the way a load shifts before it drops, the face a man pulls right before he tells you a lie. You develop a sense for it. Doesn't save you from everything, but it saved me from enough. My late wife, Sandra, used to say I was the most patient man she'd ever known, and the most stubborn, and somehow both at the same time. She was right on both counts. We were married 38 years. She passed from a stroke 4 years ago. Fast and without warning. The way she lived efficient. No fuss. No prolonged goodbye. I still reach for my phone to call her when something happens that I know she'd want to know about. That reflex hasn't died. I don't think it will. We have 2 children. Callum, our oldest, is 41. He works for the Australian Federal Police. He was stationed in Canberra for the last 6 years. Financial Crimes Division. He's the kind of man who sends birthday cards 3 days early and calls every Sunday at 9 in the morning. No exceptions. Our daughter Vivienne is 38. She married a man named Derek Croft 9 years ago, an investment advisor from Melbourne who wore expensive shoes and smiled like he was always slightly ahead of whatever conversation you were having. Vivienne adored him. Sandra never fully trusted him. I thought Sandra was being hard on the boy. That is one of the things I will carry for the rest of my life. It was a Wednesday night in August. Middle of winter. The kind of Ballarat cold that gets into your bones and stays there like an old debt. I'd been asleep for about 90 minutes when my phone lit up the nightstand. 11:47. Callum. Callum does not call me at 11:47 at night. I picked up before the second buzz. "Dad." His voice was steady, controlled in the way that only sounds calm if you don't know what controlled actually costs. "Don't turn the lights on. Don't open any apps on your phone, except this call." "Is Derek in the house?" I sat up straight. Derek had been staying with me for 5 days. He'd told me that the apartment building in Melbourne where he and Vivienne were renting was undergoing emergency asbestos remediation. The whole block evacuated on short notice, back in a fortnight. Vivienne was up in Brisbane visiting her university friend Margot. Derek had come to Ballarat. I'd given him the guest room. I'd cooked the man lamb chops. "He's in the guest room," I said. "Callum." "What's?" "Don't say his name out loud. Just yes or no." "Is he asleep?" "Far as I know." "Good. I need you to go to the garage. Not the house door, the side gate. Through the garden. Don't use the internal access. Don't turn on any lights." "Son, you're frightening me." There was a pause. Just one breath. "I know. Go now, Dad. I'll explain everything. Go." I've heard Callum use that tone twice in my life. Once when he called to tell me Sandra had been taken to hospital. Once when he called to tell me he was going into protective custody for 6 weeks during an investigation that I still don't know the full details of. Both times, I listened without question. Both times, he'd been right. I pulled on my dressing gown and house slippers, and I moved through my own home like a stranger. Through the dark hallway, past the framed photo of the 4 of us at Aries Inlet in 2009, Sandra in her yellow hat, the kids brown from a week of sun, out through the back door into the August cold without touching a single switch. The garden was dark. The gum tree out the back caught the neighbor's light and threw long shadows across the lawn. I went through the side gate, into the garage, pulled the door shut behind me. I sat on an upturned milk crate next to the old Hilux I'd been meaning to restore for 2 years. "I'm in," I whispered. Callum exhaled. "Right. Listen to me carefully." I listened. I did not interrupt. I sat in that cold garage in my dressing gown, and I listened to my son talk for 11 minutes. And with every sentence, something I'd believed for 9 years came apart in my hands like wet paper. It had started with money. It always starts with money. When Sandra passed, her estate was modest, but real. The house paid off. Mine a superannuation account she'd built over 32 years of work. As a practice manager at a medical clinic, a term deposit she'd rolled over quietly every 18 months since 1997, and a small parcel of shares in a mining company that her own father had left her. Total value: somewhere north of $460,000. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for somebody to decide it was worth engineering a plan around. Sandra had a will. We'd had it drawn up together in 2011 at a solicitor's office on Sturt Street, right after her mother died, and she decided she wanted everything in order. I was there. I watched her sign it. The estate was to be split equally between Callum and Vivienne, with a specific bequest of $18,000 to her sister Paulette, who'd looked after Sandra's mother in her final years without complaint or compensation. That was the document. That was the only document. Except it wasn't. Callum had been investigating a case for 14 months. A financial advisor in Melbourne who had quietly built a second practice underneath his legitimate fabricated documents, forged signatures, estate fraud targeting elderly clients whose families didn't ask enough questions. The kind of operation that relies on trust, on distance, on the assumption that grief makes people stop looking closely. The financial advisor's name was Derek Croft. Callum found the connection to our family 8 months ago. He hadn't told me. He couldn't. The moment I knew, I would have, and here he paused, and I could hear him choosing his words the way you choose your steps on a dark staircase. Reacted in a way that would have ended the case, and not ended well for anyone. He was right. I would have. What Derek had done, what Callum had spent 8 months proving, was this. 18 months before Sandra died, Derek had begun cultivating a relationship with a paralegal at our solicitor's office. A young woman named, but Callum wouldn't give me her name that night. She'd been paid, over a period of 2 years, to access the filing system and substitute documents. The will that went to probate after Sandra's death was not the will Sandra signed. Callum's share had been reduced to a nominal amount, $12,000. The remainder of what should have been his inheritance had been folded into Vivienne's share, which meant Derek's share, which meant the man sitting in my guest room had stolen my son's inheritance while holding my daughter's hand at the funeral. He had also, and this part made my hand stop working for a moment, arranged for the term deposit to be redirected. A quiet amendment to the account authority, filed 6 weeks after Sandra's death, signed in Sandra's name. Sandra, who had been dead for 6 weeks. "How long have you known it was him?" I asked. My voice came out flat. Not the way I wanted it to sound. Flat, in the way that a surface looks flat before you realize it's ice. 8 months certain. 14 months suspicious. And Vivienne. Callum was quiet for a moment. Vivienne doesn't know. She cannot know yet. If she finds out before we move, she'll confront him. And if he runs, he stopped. He has a secondary passport, Dad. We found it 3 months ago. If he runs, we may not get him back. I sat with that in the cold dark for a long moment. My daughter's husband, the man who had read a poem at Sandra's funeral, the man who had held Vivienne's hand at the graveside and told me, with his eyes full and his voice steady, that Sandra had been an extraordinary woman and that he was honored to have known her. I had thanked him for saying that. "Why is he here?" I asked. "Why now? Why my house?" "Because of something in your filing cabinet. The garage went colder somehow. We've had reason to believe, Callum said carefully, that Derek retained a copy of the original will, the real one. Not as evidence of what he did as insurance, proof of what Sandra actually intended. In case Vivienne ever turned on him and tried to claim she'd been misled about the estate. A leash, I said. Exactly. We've been monitoring his movements for 4 months. He accessed your study during his last visit in April. We couldn't confirm what he was looking for without an entry we couldn't justify. But 3 weeks ago, we got the financial records that gave us probable cause on everything else. We needed him to come back and go for whatever he's looking for. We needed it on his hands. Not ours. You used my house as a mousetrap, I said. I used his greed as a mousetrap, Callum said. Your house was just where he left the cheese. I wanted to be furious at him. I held the feeling up and looked at it honestly. It didn't fit right, because underneath the cold and the dark and the 9 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and all the ordinary moments I had shared a table with the man who had stolen from Sandra's grave, underneath all of it was something that felt, God help me, like gratitude. My boy had done this properly. He hadn't cut corners. He hadn't let it become personal in the way that destroys cases and careers. He'd done it right. What happens now? I asked. He told me. There was a gala fundraising dinner on Friday evening. The Ballarat Base Hospital Foundation annual event, held at a function center out on Doveton Street. Black tie. Derek had mentioned it to me 2 days earlier. His firm was a minor sponsor. He'd be expected to attend. Do you mind if I borrow the car, Ray? Mine's in for a service in Melbourne. I'd said of course. I'd handed him the keys. Vivienne was flying back from Brisbane on Friday afternoon. Derek had told her about the dinner. She was coming directly from the airport. She'll be there, I said. It wasn't a question. She'll be there, Callum confirmed. And so will Paulette. My eyebrows went up in the dark. Paulette has known for 3 months, Callum said. She helped us verify details about Mum's original will that we couldn't source from the paper trail. She remembered a specific conversation she and Mum had about the wording of the bequest clause. It matched the original document exactly and contradicted the version that went to probate. Paulette, Sandra's sister. The woman who had quietly looked after their mother for 4 years without once asking for acknowledgement. Sandra had always said Paulette was the most quietly formidable person she'd ever known. Sandra had been right. Sandra was always right. I just needed to catch up. Get some sleep, Dad, Callum said. Friday's going to be a long night. I went back inside, past the Aries Inlet photo, past Sandra's reading chair, through the kitchen where the lamb chop pan was still soaking in the sink because Derek had offered to do the washing up and hadn't finished the job. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden in the dark. Down the hall, Derek Croft was asleep in my house, dreaming whatever a man like that dreams about. On Friday night, he would be sitting at a table in a function room in Ballarat, probably ordering the duck, probably topping up other people's wine, probably telling a story that made everyone lean in. I was going to be there. This time I wasn't making anybody lamb chops. I woke Friday morning at 6 and made a full breakfast. Bacon, eggs, toast, the works. Sandra's rule. Never face anything important on an empty stomach. Derek came down at 7:30 in his bathrobe, hair still damp, smelling of the good soap I'd put out for him in the guest bathroom. He asked if there was coffee. I poured him a cup. Big night tonight, he said, scrolling his phone. Should be a good one, I said. He looked up. He had very good eyes for reading rooms, Derek. It was part of what made him effective at what he did. The legitimate version and the other one. Something moved across his face. Just a flicker. Not even a quarter second. And then the smile came back. Polished. And ready. You should come along, Ray. More the merrier. He said it lightly. as if inviting me were the most natural thing in the world. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. That flicker again. Faster this time. Then gone. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup. He was good at small gestures of consideration. Derek. The kind that cost nothing, and by a great deal, and went back upstairs to get ready. I stood at the sink and watched the cup draining, and thought about Sandra's face the one time I'd caught her watching Derek at a family dinner. Not angry, not suspicious, measuring. The way she used to measure a situation before she committed to a decision. She knew. She had always known something was wrong with the shape of him. She just didn't know the specific shape of the wrongness. I wished, standing there at that sink in August, that I had asked her why she measured him like that. I never did. I thought I was being fair. I thought I was giving the man a chance. What I was really doing was not wanting to see something I'd have to act on. The Ballarat Base Hospital Foundation dinner was held at a function center on Doveton Street. High ceilings, round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces with native flowers, waratahs and banksias. Very Sandra, which is a thought that arrived uninvited and sat heavily on my chest. I arrived at 6:40, which was when Callum had told me to arrive. The room was half full. I found our table near the center 12 seats, reserved card. Vivienne's handwriting on the place cards, because she'd helped coordinate the seating. She'd been planning this evening for weeks, helping Derek look good in front of his colleagues, helping the man who had been planning their financial ruin before he'd put a ring on her finger. I sat down. I ordered water. I waited. Paulette arrived at 7:10. She was 63 years old, and she looked like Sandra around the eyes, in a way that still catches me unprepared. 4 years later. She wore a dark navy jacket and the expression of a woman who had been carrying a significant weight for 3 months and was ready to set it down with some force. She found me across the room and came directly over. She sat beside me, put her hand on my arm once, briefly. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Ask me in an hour," I said. Sandra would have been here at 5 o'clock and had the event coordinator fully briefed. Sandra, I said, would have had the whole thing documented and cross-referenced. That got a real smile from her. Brief and true and sad around the edges. The rest of the table filled in by 7:20. 2 couples from Derek's firm. I'd met them at Christmas parties. Perfectly pleasant people who had no idea what they'd walked into. Derek's business partner, a tall man named Fletcher, who laughed too loudly and meant it sincerely. And then Vivienne, in a cream dress, walking in on Derek's arm, laughing at something he'd said, and she looked, in that moment, so much like Sandra at 38 that I had to look away briefly and find my water glass. That was going to be the hardest part. That had always been going to be the hardest part. Derek worked that table the way he worked every room, effortlessly, generously, with the kind of attention that makes people feel chosen. He remembered names, remembered details, asked the right questions. He poured wine before the waitstaff could get to it. He told a story about a sailing trip off the Mornington Peninsula that had everyone listening. He was magnetic in the specific way that certain things are magnetic. You lean in instinctively, right up until you understand what you've leaned into. He and I made eye contact once during the entree. He raised his glass slightly in my direction, easy and confident. I raised mine back and thought, "You're about to have the most expensive dessert of your life." Callum had said, "We'll let him get through the entree." The entree came and went. The bread, the salads, the table warm with conversation, and wine and 9 years of Vivienne, believing she'd built a life with a man who wanted what she wanted. Fletcher was telling a story about his daughter's school play. One of the women from the firm was asking Vivienne about Brisbane. My phone vibrated once in my jacket pocket. A message from Callum. 2 words. "Coming in." I set the phone face down. Paulette, beside me, had gone very still. She'd seen my face. The main course arrived. Derek was mid-sentence, something about interest rate forecasts. The kind of conversation that was really just a confidence display in financial clothing when the main doors of the function room opened. Callum walked in. Dark suit, white shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which I would later learn was accurate. Behind him were 2 people. I didn't recognize a woman in a charcoal blazer. A younger man with the specific posture of someone who has done this before and intends to do it correctly. They moved through the room with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. The room didn't stop all at once. It was gradual. The way a sound fades when something shifts in the air. A table near the entrance went quiet first. Then, another. Then Fletcher stopped mid-sentence and looked up. Derek had his back to the door. Vivienne saw Callum first. Her face opened up completely, the way it does when she sees her brother. Always, like a window, catching sudden light. Cal. Oh. You're here. I didn't know you were coming. And then her voice tapered off. She'd seen the 2 people behind him. She'd seen the way they were moving. Callum walked the length of that room without looking at anyone except Derek. Derek turned around slowly. The way a man turns around when he's heard a sound he recognizes, and the recognition is not good news. The composed man, the confident advisor, the one who smiled like he was always slightly ahead. He looked at my son, and for one moment, one single, unguarded, irretrievable moment, I watched everything he'd spent 9 years building leave his face all at once. There you are, I thought. That's the real one. Callum stopped at the edge of the table. He looked at Derek Croft with the patience of a man who has been waiting a very long time and is in no hurry now that the waiting is done. Derek Allen Croft. Quiet. Certain. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery of a testamentary instrument, obtaining financial advantage by deception, and money laundering. You do not have to say anything. But anything you do say may be used in evidence. The table went to stone. This is Derek's voice found itself, barely. A thin surface of composure, just enough. This is a private function. This is not the place for, I have the original will. Callum said. Silence. I have the bank authority amendment filed 6 weeks after Sandra Whitfield's death, bearing her signature. I have 14 months of financial records connecting your firm's secondary account structures to the redirected funds. I have testimony from the paralegal at Hendricks and Associates, who received $64,000 in payments between 2017 and 2021. Callum tilted his head slightly. I also have a full record of your secondary passport and the account in your mother's maiden name in Singapore, which, given everything else, the court is going to find very interesting. Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The woman in the charcoal blazer stepped forward. She had the handcuffs out with the efficiency of someone for whom this is an ordinary Wednesday. Derek Croft stood up from that table, from the fundraising dinner Vivienne had spent 3 weeks helping organize, from the white linen and the native flowers and the table full of people who had thought they knew him, and he stood up, and he looked across the room at me, just me, like a man finally understanding the full geometry of something he'd thought he controlled. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I held his gaze level and steady, and I let him read whatever he needed to read in it. You sat at my table, I thought. You slept in my house. You borrowed my car. You read a poem at my wife's funeral. You held my daughter's hand at the graveside and told me Sandra was extraordinary. You looked me in the eye and I believed you. You stole from a woman who spent 32 years building something from nothing, one careful decision at a time. You stole from her children. You stole from her sister. You signed her name 6 weeks after we buried her. I was not the fool in the room. The handcuffs clicked. Fletcher made a sound. One of the women pushed back from the table. Derek didn't fight. The composure came back. Thin and functional. Just enough. And I think that was the most truthful thing about him. In the end. Even then. The performance didn't fully stop. They walked him toward the door. He didn't look at Vivienne. Vivienne did not look at him either. She was sitting perfectly still in her cream dress, with both hands flat on the white tablecloth. Her face was doing something I didn't have a name for and chose not to examine too closely. Because she was Sandra's daughter, and Sandra's daughters do not perform their pain for rooms full of people. They file it away and deal with it on their own terms, in their own time. I knew that about her. I should have protected her better from the reason she'd need to. The room stayed very quiet for what felt like a long time. Someone's glass clinked against a plate. The world remembered how to work. Callum came back to the table. He sat down. He looked at his sister. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you sooner." She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was her mother's daughter. "How long did you know?" 8 months certain. And Mum's real will. She said it flatly, like a woman placing a file on a desk, has been verified and is being filed correctly. Your share goes back to what Mum intended. Equal. Callum's too. And Paulette's bequest. Vivienne looked down the table at Paulette. Something passed between them. One of those entire conversations that women who have loved each other since childhood can have without a word. Then Vivienne looked at me. "Dad," she said. Just that one word. And her voice broke on it exactly once. Briefly. Then held. I got up and walked to her and put my arms around her the way I had when she was 9 years old and frightened of the dark. She held on with both hands for a moment. Then she straightened up, the way Sandra used to straighten up after allowing herself something as if grief were a luxury with a time limit. She looked at the untouched main course in front of her. "Did anyone try the beef?" she asked. I blinked. "What?" "The beef. I helped plan the menu, and I've never actually been to one of these dinners. I want to know if it's any good." Callum looked at me. I looked at Paulette. Paulette picked up her fork. We ate. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in September, I came downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The garden was turning the gum tree out the back, had that particular color it gets in early spring. The light different, like something deciding to change its mind. On the bench beside my cup was a manila folder with a sticky note on the front in Callum's handwriting. Filed correctly. Certified copy enclosed. Inside was Sandra's will. The real one. Her actual words. Her actual intentions. The version where Callum wasn't erased. The version where Paulette was acknowledged the way she'd always deserved to be. The version where nobody had reached into a grieving family and quietly rearranged what a good woman had spent her life deciding. I put my hand flat on the folder and stood there in the September morning. "Got him, Sandy," I said. To the kitchen, to the reading chair in the corner, to the woman who had measured Derek Croft at a family dinner 9 years ago and seen something in the shape of him that I had chosen not to see. Took us longer than it should have. But we got him. The coffee finished. Outside, the magpies started up their morning carry-on, the way they always do. Like they've got something urgent to settle and aren't interested in being quiet about it. I poured a cup, and for the first time in a long time, it tasted the way it was supposed to. There are things I have learned that I didn't want to learn. The people who mean to hurt you rarely look like danger. They look like the person you chose for your daughter. They look like someone who does the dishes and remembers your coffee order and says the right things at funerals. They learn your rhythms, and they use your trust the way a locksmith uses a key precisely, efficiently, and only when you're not watching. I have learned that patience is not the same as passivity. My son waited 8 years to do this correctly. 8 years of watching, building, waiting for the moment when the evidence was beyond argument. There are men who would have moved too soon, and the case would have collapsed, and Derek Croft would have walked away. Callum didn't move too soon. He moved when he was certain. That is not a small thing. I have learned that grief makes us vulnerable in ways we don't see until someone has already walked through the door we left open. When Sandra died, I trusted the process. I trusted the solicitor's office. I trusted the paperwork. I trusted my son-in-law. Grief quiets the part of us that asks questions, because asking questions takes energy, and energy is in short supply when you are carrying that much loss. That vulnerability is not a character flaw, but it is something the wrong people know how to use. I have learned, too late, and not too late, to listen to what the people I trust are trying to tell me without words. Sandra measured that man at dinner, and I thought she was being unfair. She was being honest. There is a difference. And I should have known which one she was. And I have learned this, which is perhaps the most important thing I can pass on. Justice is not guaranteed. It is not automatic. It does not arrive on schedule. It arrives when someone decides to go looking for it and does not stop. Callum decided. Paulette decided. And eventually, when I was sitting in a cold garage in my dressing gown at midnight with my son's voice in my ear, I decided too. Some losses cannot be recovered. Sandra cannot be recovered. The years I spent trusting the wrong person cannot be given back. But what was taken from her memory, from her intentions, from the careful record of what she wanted for the people she loved, that was given back. And that matters. That matters more than I knew how to say in a function room on Doveton Street in August. But it's enough. It's more than enough. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of something you can't yet see the shape of trust, the people who have earned it, question the people who performed for it, and don't let anyone tell you that asking questions is the same as being unkind. Sandra knew, and she was the kindest person I have ever known.